Hi everyone, my name is Ilya. I'm a product lead at Wise, which until the last week was called TranferWise. And today I'm going to talk about growing products with the KPIs. And I will start from the very beginning on what is the KPI structure, KPI tree, and why the product needs one. Then talk about the practical examples on how to build the KPI tree or structure for your product, and then wrap up with the practical examples on how to use it. And before, like little insight on the scale of the TranferWise's organization to get a sense on where those types of structures are applicable and have been used. So TranferWise is the company which mission is money without borders, and we are building different products including international money transfers, multi-currency bank accounts, and other financial products for international people and businesses. And today we are more than 2,200 employees working across 14 offices. And what's more important, we have like 60 autonomous teams working on the different parts of the product. So all the topics that I will be talking about can work on quite large scale, not only at the scale of one team, but also on medium size and relatively large organizations. So moving on, so what is the KPI tree and why product needs one? And let's try to answer on this question by asking another one. Imagine you have two projects that your team can deliver, and one will improve conversion by 0.5%, and another will reduce customer contacts by 10%. And let's assume that both projects are about the same size. Which one you will choose? Tricky question. Or another one. Let's imagine you are working in e-commerce platform, and you can increase delivery speed 3 times, but it will make the delivery fees 2x higher or 10x higher. Those are the hard questions. But the truth is that the product teams are facing them like really often, almost every week, or even more frequently. And in reality, even with the small team, you have dozens, if not hundreds, metrics that you need to track. Like practical example, when I joined TranferWise 5 years ago, I've been product manager in the payments team. Essentially, this is the team that allows to accept card as a payment method. And we have like 10 different metrics, like acceptance rate, rates of do not honors, the cost of the transaction, the fraud rate, like all the different fees that we are paying for the transactions, lots of that. But we also been operating in 10 different markets where we are allowed to send money from. We also have many different segments, for example, like international cards or business cards or consumer domestic cards. And when you have like 10 metrics and 10 segments of like geographies and like, let's say 5 segments of different user types, what you end up with is like hundreds and hundreds of different metrics that you need to deal with, and you need to answer the question that I showed before when you need to compare the impact on those different metrics by particular projects in order to select that particular project, which is like navigating the plane in a sense. And in order to address that, you need to bring some order and some structure in those metrics and see which connection you have between them, which are more important, which are more fine and has a larger sensitivity. So in order to do so, I was using the KPI trees, and we use it quite broadly at Wise right now and as the company. Essentially, this is a structure that connects different metrics with each other, starting from the root metric that is aligned with the goal or the purpose or the vision of the company and the team, whatever you are building the metric structure for. And then you go deeper and deeper to get like into more like smaller, more sensitive metrics that you can impact by particular projects. So let's look more closely into those KPIs trees. There are a few qualities that define like that KPI structure is good, and particularly KPI tree is good. So first, you would want to have no overlap between the branches, or at least as minimal overlap as possible. So then, when you know that like you are moving one metric, you know that you are not making the other metric worse. And second thing is that you want to have 100% coverage. So you know that there are no gray areas or the things that you forgot to think about and don't account when you're prioritizing the project or selecting the projects or brainstorming, whatever. And a good analogy for that is actually map and with the country borders. They also covering all Earth 100%, and they don't have overlap. In the best case, when everything works well, there is no overlaps between the borders. The other good property of the tree, and it's not always like that, but in the best working KPI trees, the relationships in the branches can be expressed by the mathematical relationship. So, for example, if you look at this basic KPI structure that has profit in the root, you can see that profit can be represented as the product of turnover and profit margin per unit of turnover, and they are like they can be multiplied on each other to get the total profit of the company. Turnover on its turn is the product of active users and turnover per user, and profit per volume is the revenue per volume minus cost per volume. And you can go like that. Let's say you can go deeper in the costs, and you can say that the cost is like variable cost plus fixed cost and represent it as a sum. So having those mathematical relationship is a really good sign of having a good KPI structure. And actually it will help you to use that KPI structure to make the forecasting, which I will talk about a bit later as well. So now, as we know the good properties of the KPI structures, and we saw even some examples of them, let's talk about the approaches how to build the KPI tree. And there is a way to do so in 4 steps. So brainstorm areas of impact that you have or metrics that you already have and know. Connect those known areas, goals together. Go in depth and fill the gaps between them after you connect it. So find those gray areas that you've missed, and then remove overlaps. So let's go on those step by step, one after another. So first one is brainstorming the areas of impact. And essentially this is gathering all those metrics that you've been working on. So one way of doing this is like just taking them out of your head. Another, you might look at the projects that you or your team been working on in the last couple of quarters or years and see which metrics they've been actually moving. And you can have like all the different metrics there, like numbers of users, lifetime value, NPS, contact rate, churn rate, whatever you're using as the metric there. You can put them on the whiteboard, or you can write them down in a list in the document. And then move to the step number 2, which is trying to connect them or trying to see why do you care about this particular metric, and maybe see what are the kind of a bigger goals that this metric is designed for. So for example, I will give like few examples here. So let's say you have been working on metric of average transaction value, so the size of the purchase, like for example for e-com shop. So why would you have this? Making the average transaction value higher you increase the average transaction margin, like usually, and then it will lead to the faster growth of the margin of the company overall. Or another example, let's say you've been improving the conversion rate on the landing page. This better conversion rate leads to more new users. More new users over time increase the size of the active user base, which in turn leads to more transactions per month, which in turn leads to faster growth of the revenue of the company. Or another one, let's say for the financial service, you're working on reduction of the fraud rate, which will lead to the lower fraud costs, lower fraud losses, which in turns reduce the overall costs for all the transactions, which will bring the better average margin for the transaction, and it grows the total profit margin for the company. Or you reduce the churn rate, which leads to the less churn customers, more active customers, more transaction, faster growth. And the last one, for example, you are using LTV as the metric, and you know that like higher LTV for one customer is actually increasing the total turnover, total volume for all customers, which in turn increases the revenue for the product altogether. So those being a couple of examples, and you can think about every single metric that you brainstorm on the step number one and think, okay, like why do I have this particular metric? What is the bigger objective that this metric is making? And you can build those chains, and what you can see, all those chains, they end up with the same root, and you can then connect them together and convert this into like one tree-like structure. So when you have done this, you will see this kind of initial tree-like structure with, like, let's say, like the most important key metric in the root, the large ones on the layer, like second layer, and going deeper to more sensitive ones. You will need to go from in that tree, like in the other direction, and see which gaps do you have. So you can do this by just looking. It's like if you are missing something at the particular layer, and think, okay, what are the other metrics that I can have? What are the other objectives that I can have? And there are two really good practical approaches to think about those gaps. One is to think about the branch as the process. So for example, you want to increase new customers joining your product every month. Then what you can think about is the process of onboarding the customer to your product with the different steps, which is like heard about your customer, visit the landing page, register, made first purchase. And those are all the conversion rates, and you can have those conversion rates as the more sensitive metrics on one layer deeper from the new customer. Another way to split it, for example, the same metric, new customer joining your products per month, is to split it by the segments. So for example, you can have regional segments, Europe, Americas, Asia, countries, or you can have a type of the customer segments like consumer, SMBs, enterprise. And you can split the same number of new customers joining in this different way. Both ways will be accurate, and in both ways you will get this kind of a complete view without the gaps, because you either know all of your segments or you actually track some process end to end. And I was mentioning this before, but just like repeat this with some visual. Like you have this tree, right, with this like growing the profit like as fast as possible, growing some value, like kind of addressing this core metric that you have, and then more metrics go in deep there, and you go back and forth across those trees, like looking at each individual metric, and you ask question why to see what is what is the parent branch for that metric. For example, you can look at the, like let's say you have the goal like rise brand awareness and metric brand awareness, and you can think why I need this. And then the answer is because I want to grow the number of new users. But then you can fill the gaps and go other way and like look and ask questions of how I can impact this metric. So for example, if I want to grow number of new users per month, how I can do this? And one of the option is to rise brand awareness. And you can go deeper there and like then think, okay, how I can raise brand awareness, and you can do news, PR, you can improve the word of mouth, etc., and you can go deeper if you want. And this why and how approach allows you to iterate on your tree and make it really, really good. But then the last step is remove overlaps and remove like extra metrics. So for example, on this tree here, I wouldn't have LTVs, but I don't need it because I already have like I have like this number of transactions per customer, and I would have the average transaction size here. So in some sense, lifetime value already represented on this chart through the other metrics, so I don't need to repeat it. So thinking about the overlaps, thinking about like unnecessary branches and cutting them is the last step of making the good tree structure. And think about this as well. It's not one-time exercise, but like usually it's more of a tool that you use for your team, like always, like vision statement. And one more even simpler approach is to use a template. I've been doing the KPI trees for the different teams that I was working with or helping other product leads to build those and product managers to build those. And what I saw that there is this common structure that works for really a lot of the products with the higher branch that represent the value, which shows the total monthly turnover. Then it splits into a number of active customers and monthly volume or turnover per customer. And those in turn splits into new users that we bring and customers who churned. And the spend per customer is represented by the product of number of transactions per month and size of average transaction. So this is the branch about the turnover. And the second branch, the bottom branch, is about the economics, about the profit margin per turnover, and it's split as a sum of revenue and cost, like different revenue and cost lines. And this tree is like really good template for lots of different products. There is other version of this one, which is accounting for the fact that the most successful companies are really thinking not about the profit that they make, but for the value that they create. So in this type of tree, the upper branch about the volume stays the same, but the lower one is like slightly different. So let's zoom into this. So instead of profit that you have per unit of volume, you can think about the general value that you create for the company and for the customer. And this value that is created is split between the customer and between the company. So you would usually want to have a win-win situation where customers pays for some service to the company, but the value that they acquire is actually even bigger. And then you can think about that value that you bring to the customer. It's like usually really hard to measure or not measurable at all. Then you can think about the costs for the customer, and this is really useful. So one cost is the price, and this is like usually what is thought about. But then you can think about time they spend to use your product, nerves, efforts, etc., etc. thinking about this and reducing those other costs might sometimes allow you to charge higher price because altogether the costs for the customer are still low. Then for the company, we have this the same structure as we would have on the previous tree. So on one side, you have price that combined create revenue, like if you take all the prices for all the product you sell. And then you have the cost for the company, which is a different cost structures. So using the such template can speed up this first iteration of setting up the KPI tree. And now let's move to the last section on how to use the KPI trees. And there are multiple ways how they can be useful. So first of all, it allows to brainstorm and get at the improvement ideas. So imagine you have this good KPI structure. And you can think, okay, what we can work on as a team to improve our product to kind of improve the speed at which we grow. So you can go to the end branches of the tree and think about projects that you can do to move the metrics there. So for example, monthly new users. We might be working on improving conversion. We might be working on like adding new marketing channels or improving the existing marketing channels. So for example, we can like make better recommendation program or referral program, or we can go and look at the completely different branch of the tree. So for example, the cost per value unit, and then we can split on the different types of costs and think, okay, can we reduce the fixed cost? Can we reduce the acquisition cost? Can we reduce the cost per transaction? Maybe we will go to our partners and negotiate a better deal, etc. And this really specific question, like, okay, how to move the particular metric is often generating really a lot of good ideas, because it's often asking the question, which is like is the main step, the first step to get the good answers already. So this is a brainstorming. Second thing is prioritization. Like usually, it's also often that like you don't have a problem of not having a good ideas of what to do, but like you have too much of those good ideas and you would want to select one or two, the most impactful ones, and focus as much efforts and resources on those ones. Having the tree helps you. So for example, like returning to the kind of questions that I've asked in the very beginning, you can improve the delivery speed and through that bring, let's say, more users or reduce the churn, but it will cost you more. So having those different branches and having the mathematical relationship between those branches actually allows you to compare any project on this tree as long as you can connect the project to one or multiple branches in this tree. So for example, you can have the project that brings 1,000 new customers per month additionally, or you can have the project that saves 500 customers from churn per month. And because they are on the same branch, you can compare them and you can say that bringing new customers is more impactful. But then, since there are mathematical relationships on the deeper level, you can actually compare other parts. So for example, you can increase new users by 10%, or you can increase the spend by one customer by 20% with another project. And you can see that first will improve the product profit by 10%, the other will improve it by 20%, and so you will select the second one. So it's a bit too much words, but I hope you've bared with me. The next one is the growth prediction, and I will not stand like too much on this actually, but since you have the, like if you have the, like the forecast for the branches of the tree, and usually it's relatively simple to forecast those branches for the end of the tree, so like costs are usually quite stable. I don't know, average transaction spend is also quite stable. So it's relatively easy to forecast those lower parts of the tree. And since you have the mathematical relationships in the branches, just using those formulas to recreate the high-end metrics and eventually go into the product profit allows you to build really decent, really strong and good models for your profit growth. But what is more important, when you follow your product development, when you look at this months to months, you can see where you made a mistake in your forecast. And you not only will see the error in the kind of high level metrics, you will see it up to the level of the smaller metrics. So you might be mistaken in new users, or you might be mistaken in frequency of transactions. And then you can improve your forecast for those really sensitive metrics, and through that improve the quality of overall forecast altogether. So this is growth predictions. And the last part is the organization of the team. And this one is addressing the moment of time when your team gets too big and you actually would benefit of having it split into two, working on the different areas. Or it works for the cases where you run larger parts of an organization, if it's 5 teams, 10 teams, or even running the whole product organization with dozens of teams working on the product. So the way you cut the teams is really crucial. It always will be painful. It's always harder. You always miss something when you split the teams. You miss this awareness and understanding. So the question is how to split the team in least painful way. And there is essentially a few things to look at. You need to kind of see the which people will go to each team, that you have necessary talent in each part. You need to think about which services and technology go under each team. But most importantly, you need to think how you distribute the problems that those teams are solving between the new team structure. And with the problems goes the metrics. So the often way, the kind of good way to split the problems and the metrics between the teams is usually give some of the branches of the KPI tree to one team and some of the branches to another. And I will show this last slide. This is actually an example of the structure of the issuance tribe inside Wise. This is the group of 8 teams that are working on issuing cards to customers, the payment cards to the customers. And this is the KPI tree for the whole tribe. And you can see the different teams here represented by the different colors. I will not zoom in, but essentially you can get a sense that different branches are owned by the different teams shown on the left. So on that note, I would love to wrap up. It's been a lot of information, and I hope you've beared with me. I have this Medium where I have multiple posts where I describe those KPI trees in more details. So for the ones who want to get more kind of slower pace or more kind of insight and more details, I invite you to those posts and read them and see them. Thanks a lot for your attention, and have a great day.